Hello everyone, I'm Alexa Dunn, and today I'm going to be doing a Q&A session. I asked for questions for you here on YouTube and on my Instagram account, and you guys blew me away. I have over 100 questions, so as I'm sure you can imagine, I'm probably not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to try to run through as many as possible. In some cases, I've grouped questions that were really similar together, and I'll just answer kind of the topic overall. And then others, I'm going to try to do kind of rapid fire answer style so that I can get through as many as possible. But don't worry, if I can't get to all of them, I will do another Q&A session, or I might even take some of the juiciest questions and make entire videos addressing them. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The first question is about how you should query when you have a series plan, and this one is pretty straightforward. The magic words are standalone with series potential. You just let the agent know that this book in question does stand alone, because it should stand alone, but that series potential is kind of the magic word that tells them you've kind of planned it as a series. Then, if the agent is interested in representing you, you two can talk about how to pitch it as a series to a publisher. Next, would I ever do a fairy tale retelling or a historical? The answer is yes to both of them. I don't have a specific fairy tale retelling in mind, but just I know myself, I love fairy tales and I love retelling, so definitely yes, though put a pin in it. And historical, yes, I am working on a historically inspired fantasy right now, in fact, because I'm generally very much inspired by history, by kind of historical settings and fashion, politics, and so on, so yes to both of those. The next question is, how much work do I do on my new books before I submit them to my editor? So on The Stars We Steal, my second book, honestly, I submitted my draft 0 to her, my first draft, because I was on deadline and I needed to turn it in. So I basically just finished it and sent it to my editor. Ideally, you want to take a little bit of time to do an edit pass on it, especially with your agent if you have an editorial agent, but it's not always a perfect world, so that's what I did, but ideally I'd say I'd love to do at least one edit pass on it before I sent something to my editor, but I didn't. What was the best part about writing The Stars We Steal? And for me, it was finding the story. So The Stars We Steal started out as, and still technically is, a retelling of Persuasion, which is my favorite Jane Austen novel, but it is very much a feelings book that doesn't have like the most obvious plot. So my favorite part, honestly, was just figuring out how to adapt the book for YA to make it modern, to make it fit the genre I was writing, which is science fiction, with a little bit of a fantasy feel, and I loved coming up with kind of all of the tropes that I was gonna explore and kind of the romantic moments. It was all fun, to be honest, but that was the best part for me. Should I go with my gut on the ending of my book, or should I have multiple endings? So as you're drafting, yeah, go with your gut. Write the ending you want, but you should always remain open to changing things, because when it comes to working with an agent or an editor at a publisher, they might ask you to change it, so generally you should always stay pretty open-minded. How do you handle the ups and downs of being an author? Honestly, through my friends. Having writer friends in the community, and specifically having writer friends at all kind of different levels, but especially kind of the levels that I've kind of gone through. So having friends who have book deals or are published by similar publishers in similar genres, always having someone to talk to is simply invaluable. Because you're gonna have so many feelings in this whole thing. You're gonna oscillate up and down. You'll have good days and bad days, and it's good to have friends, and not just one kind of friend at one kind of stage of the industry, but from all over the place. So you can always kind of go to the person who's most going to help you when you're having a rough moment. Do I still write fanfic? No, I don't. I haven't written fanfiction since I was in Harry Potter fandom in like 2007, I think is around the time I stopped writing fanfic, and that was because I needed to make space in my brain for original fiction. That's me. There are plenty of people who write original fiction who still write fanfic, but I don't. So, and my fandom was Harry Potter. Which character from The Stars We Steal is the most like me? This is a really interesting question. I'm gonna hedge a little. Every character I write has a bit of something of me in them. The same goes for Brightly Burning. They have like little bits of me. Probably my main character, Leo, in The Stars We Steal is technically the most like me, just because I kind of gave her my control freak streak and also a lot of my vulnerabilities. But at the same time, Leo is also nothing like me because the way that she reacts to things and kind of goes through her life is definitely different from me because we have just different life situations. I'm definitely more confident. I'm more likely to stand up for myself than her. She's more of a passive and quiet character than I am. I'm more likely to crack a joke. So in that sense, I'm also a lot like Evgenia or Daniel, who are also characters in the book. It's tough to answer this question because none of you have read it, but yeah, I'm like a mix of all of them, but probably the most like Leo with Evgenia and Daniel. I've got a bit of Elliot in me too. Elliot Wentworth, my love interest. This is a good one. Do I think I will ever host a writing retreat for aspiring writers? The answer is yes. I have been thinking about doing this because I love going on retreats and haven't really had many opportunities. And also a friend suggested we plan one together. And so that is something that might be happening. I'm gonna put that as like a soft maybe for 2019. So if you are an aspiring writer who's looking for a writing retreat, watch this space. Next, do you need to read a lot of books to be good at writing? I have a whole video on this actually, and I can link to it down below. I do think that reading is a critical part of being a writer. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be reading constantly and read all the time. When I'm actively writing and drafting, I actually tend to go into pretty intense reading slumps, and it's okay if you do too. I just generally think that if you want to be a writer, you need to obsessively read and ingest books at some point, especially when you're first getting started. You need to know your genre, you need to know storycraft and kind of beats. So I do think reading is an important part of writing. Is it a good idea to use complicated words in writing? I love this question because my answer is no, not most of the time. I actually think there's more power in using what one might call a 1-cent word over a $1 word because it's all about kind of impact. You need to save up your cents, essentially. Use straightforward, basic language that's easy to understand so that every once in a while you can use those big, fancy, complicated words to precisely communicate exactly what you want to say in those moments. I think that complicated language and vocabulary should be earned, essentially, and if you use too much of it, you're just overwriting, you're showing off, and very often when I see people use a lot of complicated vocabulary and language, they use those words wrong, and it's just clear that they don't actually understand what those words mean. They're just trying to sound smart. So I think there's real value in straightforward, concise, clear, basic prose. What is the best and worst thing about being a published author? This is a really good question. The best thing is real readers reading my book, like people I'm not related to, who aren't friends with me, who don't owe me anything, who just genuinely pick up the book because it sounds interesting to them, and when they enjoy it, that's even better. It's just the best. I write books and seek to get them published because I want readers to read them. And then the worst part is all of kind of the anxiety, the imposter syndrome, the jealousy, just this constant influx of feelings, of not measuring up, of feeling behind, of wanting more, and then feeling ungrateful because you want more. That kind of tempest of emotions is a lot to deal with. And that I would say is the worst. And this is often fueled by the fact that publishing isn't fair and there's a lot of luck involved. All of that is kind of the worst part about being published. This is a nice kind of tea spilling question. Someone wants to know, how much do Authortubers make from their channels and when do you start making money? I have no problem being transparent about this, and you can also look up your favorite channels on Social Blade, which will give you a pretty good estimate of what people are making. So I make anywhere between like $300 and $500 a month at this point. Don't forget I have to pay like 40% of that to taxes. But that only started happening about 2 months ago. Prior to that, my average was like between 120 and 220, and that didn't start happening until I got really close to kind of when my channel sub number started getting into like the 6, 7, 8K range. Before that, I made basically nothing. It took me from June when I started my channel until February of the following year to make $100 because YouTube doesn't pay you for the first time until you reach the $100 threshold. And that was basically many months of very intense work, posting 3 times a week. After that, it started getting a little bit better. And as I said, like my average was $100 a month until very, very recently, around $100 a month. So it does take time before you start making money, and it's not foolproof. Some videos make way more than others. You know, having one video that really takes off and gets a lot of views can make a big difference. Generally, I don't advise any of you bank on Authortube making you a living. It's just not going to do that. The numbers that we get on Authortube in terms of subscribers and views, it just can't match BeautyTube or lifestyle, etc. And I'll even remind you that booktubers don't make the majority of their money off of AdSense, which is Google ad dollars. They make more of their money off of working directly with publishers and sponsorships and so on. And those opportunities are very few and far between for Authortube. So just being practical with you, Authortube is not a way to make a living. The money that I'm making off of YouTube, I'm reinvesting into the channel for equipment, and I'm using it for things like paying for the author mentor match domain and those sorts of things. It's gravy money for me. It's a nice to have, you know? The next one is, how do you balance input from your inner editorial impulses when you are pantsing a draft with discovering the direction of your story is meandering? So honestly, I had to learn this over time. It wasn't easy, but I learned to just basically say, fuck it, and push forward, to go, ugh, if I don't like something, just I leave it and I move forward, knowing that I can just fix it in revision. Fix it in revision should be your mantra when that inner editor is like niggling at you to go back and fix it now, because going back and fixing it now, so much of the time, it's going to kill your momentum and then you may not finish. So I just force myself to move forward. I yell at myself. I go, no, Alexa, stop. When you find that it's meandering, I'll be honest, you're going to meandering. If you are pantsing a book, your middle will meander. They just do. Mine always do. Fix it later. Don't worry, just fix it later. Keep going. I personally find that when I'm pantsing, I tend to write pretty tight third acts, and then I just have to go back and fix the second act mostly in parts of the beginning. So just push through. The next one is, what determines how much marketing a publisher will do for your book? How do some books become popular even if they have a pretty low rating, while other higher rated books slip under the radar? What a question. Two-parter. I'll start with the second part, which is honestly, publishing isn't fair. A lot of publishing is just luck. Really good books fail all the time and mediocre books blow up. It's just kind of, you know, what did readers want in the moment? How much did the publisher put it? You know, does the prose go down smooth like butter, even if it's not Pulitzer Prize winning prose? There's so many factors that go into it, and you can't really always explain it. But how does a publisher decide how much marketing to put into a book? So when you are taken to acquisitions at a publisher, they're going to do a P&L statement, which is a profit and loss statement, which essentially is they're going to crunch numbers and analyze things in the market and the past for the publisher. They're going to analyze how much money they think they're going to make from your book. From there, that helps determine the advance that they decide to pay you. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the time, the size of the advance gives you a sense of how much marketing they're going to put behind the book, because the advance tells you how well they think it's going to do, and very often they decide which marketing to put behind a book based on the advances that they paid. But things can change. Things about the market can change. Early buzz can change. So a book could get a lower advance, maybe it's a niche title, but then it starts getting buzz, maybe with indies, reviewers, and so on, and then it'll get a marketing push. Or when a publisher buys a book for a large advance, they can, you know, be taking a bet that they think it's going to be a big thing, but then the market shifts. And so that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get the biggest marketing push. When the market shifts, another book they acquired for less money or just didn't have as high expectations for can become the lead title. Things change all the time. And essentially, they put marketing behind what they think they can sell. But it's always relative not only to the market, but to the rest of the list and kind of the bandwidth that the team at the publisher has to push one title more than another, kind of balancing all of the responsibilities they have at any given time. It's maddening, I know, but you just kind of have to go into it and hope for the best. And then another thing I'll just throw into that, here's the thing. The more pushed a book is, the more people buy it, the more people who read it, the more likely it is to have a low rating, because you just have a larger critical consensus. Very often I've seen that books that do have less buzz and get into fewer hands are likely to have higher ratings because the people who read it are self-selecting the book, this niche book that they think they're going to love, and then they'll give it higher ratings. So a rating on Goodreads doesn't necessarily mean that a book is like relatively better than another. I don't try to put too much stock in the ratings because critical mass does make a difference, and a lot of people love to hate on popular books. That's another reason popular books might have lower ratings, so there's not really a direct corollary there. From your experience, is there an expected word count for authors? So I have a whole video on why word counts, which I will link to down below. Not much has changed since I made it. Generally speaking, it's not so much about being a debut with your word count, it's the word count that's appropriate to your genre. Though I will say, most agents say that they will balk if a book that's queried to them, essentially by a debut author, is over 100K. When you get word counts that are much higher, it can really set off alarm bells for an agent about your ability to edit or knowing the market. So the safe spot to be is under 100K, but then you really have to pay attention to the conventions for the genre. So for example, a YA contemporary would be anywhere between kind of 45 and 70,000 words, whereas a YA sci-fi or fantasy book can range from between like 60,000 words to 100,000 words. Some of them can be more than 100,000 words, but you might have trouble querying them as a debut if they're over. There's nothing wrong with querying a book at under 100,000 words, selling it, and then adding to it once you have a publisher. That happens all the time. Do I need to read classics to be a writer? I love this question because my answer is most of the time no. I am not a classic snob. I love classics, or at least there are many that I love. I've certainly read them. I clearly adore several of them enough to do retellings of them, but I'm not a literary snob. I don't think if you haven't read Dickens that you're garbage. I'm not going to judge you if you haven't read Jane Eyre. I understand that kind of the language and the prose and the style of a lot of classics can create a real barrier for modern readers. I, kind of struggle sometimes with them too. I have to get into a certain mindset to read those books, and some of them honestly aren't as good as people say they are. They're classics because people decided they were classics and they insist on teaching them over and over again. There are plenty of classics that I don't particularly care for. But what I will say is I do think that classic literature, things that we consider classics, there's good things in there. And I think it's worth trying to read them, figuring out which ones you like and which ones you don't. Like, I'll fully admit, I really hate A Tale of Two Cities, for example, but I liked Great Expectations, and I don't love every Jane Austen novel. I thought Mansfield Park was kind of boring, and then there are other classic authors that I just don't give two hoots about, and I'm not even gonna bother reading, to be perfectly frank with you. But I found such value in seeing kind of the storytelling beats and styles and themes and character in so many of what we consider classics. They provided enormous value to me as a developing reader and storyteller, and I do hope that any modern reader would try to read them, and if not read them, to at least seek out high quality adaptations of classics, so like BBC miniseries and so on. I'm not a snob in the sense that I think it's perfectly fine if you want to watch the miniseries of Emma instead of reading the book. I'm not going to shame you for that. I adore the miniseries for Emma. Or, like, I love Bleak House, the miniseries based on the Dickens novel. Have I read the Dickens novel? I have not, but I still think I can say I really loved Bleak House. So I'm not a snob about this. I think there's value in classics, but no, I don't think you have to read them to be a writer, unless, pin in that, if you're doing a retelling of a classic, I do think you need to read the classic. I don't think you can just watch an adaptation, a miniseries, a movie, or read other retellings of it to get the full sense of kind of the soul of that book. I do think you have to read the classic on which you are basing your retelling if you're doing a retelling. That's just my line in the sand. I don't think I could have written a halfway decent Jane Eyre retelling if I hadn't read that book so many times. And honestly, I've never found a Jane Eyre adaptation that has fully satisfied me because the book is its own kind of precious entity. I got a lot of questions about determining the genre of your book or the age category of your book and how to do that. And to be perfectly frank, what do you like to read? What are you reading, and what is the story that you want to tell? If you like to read tons of YA and the kind of voice and story that you're dying to tell is about a teenage protagonist and feels like a YA novel, then you're writing a YA novel. If you don't read YA and you want to tell a story about someone who starts as a teenager and grows up over many years and becomes an adult, you're simply writing a novel. I got a lot of questions about that too. You're just writing a novel, and there's nothing wrong with that. You wrote a novel, congratulations. You can query it as general fiction. It's not YA, however. So how do you determine what you should write? What do you want to write? What do you like to read? Just go with your gut on that. I know YA seems very like trendy and all that, but it's actually super saturated now, so don't just jump on YA because you think it's a bandwagon. Yeah, read books you like, write the story you want to write, and figure out what it is and what it isn't. Another one I got from a few people that is really hard to answer is, how do you know when your book is good enough to be sent to agents? This is a really tough question to answer, and so often, you know, I can tell you if I look at your work. I don't have time to look at all your work, but it's hard to kind of nebulously tell you so that you can judge on your own. But generally, how many times have you revised it? Have you revised it at least once, if not twice, 3 times? Have you worked over the story more than once and made significant changes where you feel that things have started to really come together? Have you given the book to multiple critique partners and gotten pretty good feedback back, or simply had them read all the way through it? I'll tell you, one sign that maybe something is catching people up is when you send your book out to beta readers and they don't finish. They always ghost you. You need to ask yourself, is something not working with my prose, with the first act? You might even ask them, at what point did you stop reading? And then you need to analyze what's going on. Do you have a pacing problem? Do you have an agency problem with your characters? Do you have a prose problem? And the thing is, we're never actually done editing our novel, and so many of us are hard on ourselves when it comes to our own writing, and if left to our own devices, we will edit forever and never feel like our book is ready. So just kind of get your book to as good a place as you feel you can get it right now, by yourself and with the help of a few critique partners. And usually you're gonna have a gut feeling of, how much more can I possibly do on this book? How long can I work on this book? And very often that point is when you are ready to query to agents. Now, just start out small, do batch querying to see if your query and your pages are working. Don't query everyone all at once in case your book does need more work. Just kind of take it in stages and it'll be okay. At some point you have to get off the pot, so to speak, and just query your book. A similar and related question I got from a few people is, how close to perfect does your book have to be before you query it? It doesn't have to be perfect, I'll tell you that. But people want to know, how much will spelling and grammar mistakes trip up an agent? Well, it depends. If you have a ton of mistakes on every single page, yes, that's going to trip up an agent. But if you have a typo here or there, or a usage or grammar problem here or there, it's not really gonna matter. You want to make sure the prose is reasonably clean. Clean means that it's free of careless errors, it's free of kind of 101 craft, grammar, and usage types of errors. So it's not so much about making it perfect, but making it clean and readable alongside the developmental edits you're doing to make it kind of work as a story. One thing I will throw in here about knowing when you're ready to query and kind of polish level and perfection, it's notorious that most aspiring writers work the most on their first 50 pages, the partial, and very often the book falls apart after that. So I would caution all of you to put in good work on your middle. Make sure it doesn't drag too much. It's not the dreaded muddled middle. It feels tight and it moves the plot forward. And focus on your ending, because I will say, if you really screw up the ending, if you just fail to land the ending, that can lead to a no for an agent. So while your first 50 pages are very important, you do need to work on and polish the entire novel, because you don't always get a second chance. If you have a specific theme for your book, how can you make sure you're staying true to it, especially in a first draft? I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't think too much about theme while I'm writing. I think that if you think too much about theme, your book can come across a little bit try-hard, a little bit preachy, a little bit like those kind of lessons novels, and people generally don't like reading those. For me, theme emerges as I write. I'm writing the story that I'm interested in, and then I realize things emerge as I write them. So as I wrote Brightly Burning, I always knew class was important, but once I was actually done with it, I was like, wow, class is a much bigger theme here than I ever anticipated. And a very similar thing happened with my next book. And then it's like, oh, I write about class all the time. And then you can refine your theme as you're editing. You can actually think about the implications of every part of the book. Is this contributing to the theme I want to get across? Is this counter to what I want to say? So I personally don't think you should hyper focus on that in draft one, because I think it will really take away from the story feeling organic and fun. I also got several questions from a lot of people about your first novel sucking, because I had that in my harsh writing advice video. I do actually plan on doing a whole video where for fun I kind of rebut all of my harsh advice and give you some of the nuance that is missing from a video like that. So let's talk a little bit about first novels sucking. First drafts of first novels suck. There's going to be fundamental problems with the first ever draft of the first ever novel that you complete. I wrote one where basically nothing happened for the first 2/3 of the book, and boy did I learn something about structure finishing that. But here's the thing, my first ever novel was good enough to get a literary agent. It didn't sell to a publisher, but I was able to edit it into a state where an agent was interested in representing me. It is 100% possible to polish up a first book and get it publishable. I have several friends whose debut novels were their first novels, but it wasn't the first draft of that novel. In many cases, it was the 12th, 13th, or 14th draft of that novel that got published. So you can put the polish work on a first book and get it to where you want to be. But it is far less common to be able to publish a first ever book. And so I say the whole your first book is gonna suck, mostly to take pressure off of you to write a perfect first draft, but also to caution you that in the industry, it's not that common to have your first book be published as a debut. So my debut was my third book, and I'm happy about it. My third book is way better than my first book. Even though my first book was perfectly solid, I have leveled up so much as a writer, writing different stories instead of just editing the same story repeatedly, that I am glad that I didn't publish my first book. And so I give that advice to just encourage you to sometimes step away from a story and write a new one, because every time you try to write a brand new story, so you have new characters and new conflicts and stakes and challenges to writing that book, you're gonna level up as a writer. And the thing is, you don't have to abandon your first book forever. There are also cases where authors had a third or fourth book published, and then their publisher bought the first ever book they wrote, but of course then it was edited. So you don't always have to abandon an idea. Someone asked about my academic background, so I thought I would briefly talk about that. So I majored in magazine journalism in college because I really wanted to be a film critic. So journalism was my dream for a really long time. I wanted to work for Entertainment Weekly specifically. So I don't actually have a creative writing background at all. I never took a class in it or majored in it. So yeah, I did journalism. So I was basically doing reporting and criticism and magazine features. And I think you can kind of tell in my writing that I have a journalistic background. I happen to really like narrative fiction written by journalists. Go figure, it's the kind of thing that I like. And I also minored in German because I am technically kind of sort of fluent in German. I was an exchange student, so I lived in Germany my junior year of high school. I'm very rusty now, so don't ask me to speak German, but I can probably understand it if you speak it to me. So yeah, minoring in German was really interesting because I ended up taking German film classes. I took 2 of them in college, and that was a whole other way of learning about storytelling by learning about film craft, but specifically kind of many of the classics of film canon are actually German, because Germany more or less started the film industry or was one of the early players in the film industry. So that was really interesting. And I think if I hadn't majored in journalism, I would have majored in television. And now I work in television. So those are kind of the things that interested me at the time that I wanted to study and kind of go into. I also got a question asking if individuals with disabilities such as autism can be authors, and yes, absolutely, you can. There are many, many authors, including and especially in YA, published authors who have autism and other disabilities. There's actually a great organization called Disability and Kidlit. I will link to it down below. There are many role models for you who, you know, they're in this business, they're writing great books. In many cases, they're writing fabulous own voices narratives, and they are making it in this industry. No disability precludes you from being a published author. So I'm gonna link you down below to Disability and Kidlit, and you know, hopefully you can find some of those role models and resources. The next one is great. Did my publisher give me a set time to write The Stars We Steal, or did I have freedom to write at my own pace? On average, when does the industry expect a published writer to deliver their next draft or book? My situation was very strange. So I was orphaned by my editor shortly after Brightly Burning was acquired by my publisher, which means my editor left my publishing house. In the interim, I was temporarily assigned to the publisher to kind of oversee me, and she's the one who okayed my book to idea, which I started working on. But I didn't have a firm deadline. I wasn't given a deadline. I thought I had about 9 months to write the book, and that is what I kind of forged forward with, a timeline of, okay, I have 9 months, meaning I was starting my book in the summer, and I thought I will turn this in the late spring. Then I was assigned an editor, and it turned out they wanted the book more like 6 months later. But at that point, I wasn't gonna make it, because by the time they told me, it was so tight to the deadline that I was like, I'm not even halfway through the book. And I was able with my agent to basically like get the time that I had originally set for myself, which was writing the book in 9 months. So the thing is, when you sell a book and you're being published on a normal publishing schedule, so they buy your book and then your book's gonna come out in about 2 years, you do indeed have 9 months to a year to write your next book. Yay! But I was crashed. My first book was published on an accelerated publishing schedule, which meant in order to keep the book a year schedule that publishing likes, I would need to turn in the first draft of my second book on a tighter schedule, but I didn't know that. So the answer is they wanted me to write it in 6 months. I wrote it, the first draft, in 9 months, and then it took a subsequent almost 6 months from there to do all the developmental edits and line edit it, which is why you're not getting my second book until 2020. Generally speaking, I have heard that 6 months is actually a pretty comfortable average of what publishers want you to write your first draft in, and then they would build in the following 6 months to do all the rest of the edits on a book. So it's essentially a 9 to 12 month schedule that you would be on to write. That is very fast for writing books. And of course there are plenty of exceptions. There are plenty of people like me who need a little bit more time. And then it just means their books aren't coming out a year apart. They might come out 18 months apart. So that's kind of the nebulous answer there. And the thing is, this is why you have a literary agent. This is why you have a great literary agent, because my agent is my advocate, and my agent was the one who interacted with my publisher and said, hey, she needs more time, and it was totally fine. She handled everything for me, and I just bumped along doing my author thing. So that's why I'm very grateful for my agent. I'm very grateful for my editor and my publishing house for understanding that I needed more time to work on the book and kind of, you know, accommodating me and moving the publishing schedule around. So that's my story, but it's gonna be different for every author. Some authors have greater deadline pressure and they can't have their pub date moved, so it really depends. One thing that I think worked out really well for me is that my book is not a sequel. This isn't a series, like a duology or a trilogy, so it wasn't as imperative that my 2 books be published a year apart. Here's a good question. How can I expand my horizons on vocabulary? Read. Honestly, that's my recommendation. Read. Challenge yourself to read a little bit outside your comfort zone. This isn't to knock any books for not having as wide a range of vocabulary, but there are certain books you can read that do have more challenging kind of sentence structure and prose and style, and they are more likely to use bigger words. That sounds terrible. And you can find those books within any genre is what I mean. It's kind of seeking out the books in YA, even middle grade, to be honest. Middle grade has some pretty fancy vocabulary. There are a lot of those books. In fantasy or sci-fi, adult novels, etc. Seek out books where the core concept is interesting to you, but when you flip through it and you read it, the prose is captivating, but maybe perhaps presents a slight challenge. Read those books. You're gonna figure out what the words mean if you encounter some that you don't quite know by context clues or by looking them up, and you'll go, oh, amazing. I love the way this author described that feeling. I would have used this basic word, but they used this beautiful metaphor with these bigger vocabulary words. And from there, you will kind of by osmosis level up some of your skills. That's my recommendation. I've picked up a lot of my favorite kind of vocabulary words just from reading. And when I encounter a word that I think is really baller, I will often write it down. I'll be like, I forgot about that word. That's a great word. I'm going to use that word. So that's how I would recommend leveling up your vocabulary a little. This one is fun. You may not want to divulge your wizardry. But how do you predict publishing trends? I know you shouldn't write for trends, but I'm working on several very different manuscripts and never know which one will want to work on polishing first for submission. This is a great question. So it's an art, not a science. And honestly, I've gotten pretty good at predicting marketing trends by voraciously keeping up with the industry. So it's following critical people on Twitter. It's reading deal announcements every week. I read the deal announcements on Publishers Weekly every week. I also have a Publishers Marketplace subscription. I look things up on there as well. That one's not required. I've just found that it definitely helps because you can look at what people are actually selling, and that's what you want to do. You're following top agents. You're following the trades who report the deals. You're following a wide variety of authors, both established, but also people kind of in your aspiring class, so to speak. Look at the contests, all of those pitch contests. Look at what people are favoriting, what is kind of rising to the top, what are people really excited about, and then what actually sells to publishers. And then you pay attention to the marketing cycles. It's a lot. I honestly just pay attention to which titles publishers are pushing for buzz, which things are selected for lists. You just kind of pay attention and you start to notice things. So that's why I was paying attention to sales, and I've been, of course, paying attention to things coming out and what hits the list and displays in bookstores. That's another thing. You can go to Barnes & Noble, look at the books on display, and you will know what publishers are paying to promote. That's how I was like, witches are back. I just started to notice it. Prior to the space and YA trend, micro trend, I was just paying attention to sales, and I was like, ooh, space books are selling again, finally! I've been wanting to write my space book, and then I did, because I love those kinds of books, and specifically as a sci-fi author, I have just had an eagle eye on publishing and sales for years and years and years, because I knew that my genre was always a tough sell, and I wanted to do well in the industry. I wanted to sell, so I just kept up with things. So I kind of knew where I stood, and it didn't specifically, it's never guided exactly what projects I work on. I always worry that you guys think I'm super calculated. My first and my second book didn't fit selling publishing trends at all, and I did in a sense kind of pay for that because then they didn't go anywhere. Brightly Burning, I did see an opportunity kind of sales and buzz, and I did take it. But it was the book I wanted to write. So I encourage all of you to always still go with the book you want to write, but it is true, you can select kind of which one to push at a given time because you kind of see where things are going. So yeah, I pay attention to sales, I pay attention to agents, I pay attention to contests, I pay attention to what's in bookstores and what's being pushed. I pay attention to the New York Times bestseller list. I pay attention to what not only gets optioned for TV and film, but what actually makes it onto your TV or into the theaters. It's a lot of things, and it's not easy, but you just you can potentially get good at it. Whew, this is getting really long, guys. I think I'm gonna have to wrap it up soon. I'm gonna try to do a few more of these that are faster, but not this next one. I just really want to answer this next one. Do you have any regrets being traditionally published? With all the marketing you do now, how do you feel it compares with that required of self-publishing? Do you feel your current success is anchored in being traditionally published, or do you feel that you would have had equal traction relative to your efforts self-publishing? In other words, has your perspective changed in any way? I have a video coming up that is kind of my post-mortem on my traditional debut experience. So a bit of that is in there too, but I regret nothing. I'm generally someone who doesn't really have regrets. I try not to think that way. I think more of like, you your life forks in one direction and everything leads up to certain moments, and like that's just kind of fate. No regrets. So first of all, I firmly believed then, and I still firmly believe now, I could not have debuted in the way that I debuted and have had the success that I have without having been traditionally published. The whole reason I wanted to be traditionally published in YA, not only that traditional publishers have a foothold in bookstores and libraries that they still have, that remains true, and I wanted it. I wanted that distribution, no regrets. But also that kind of that branding that you get from being traditionally published, especially in YA, just kind of the vetting, the stamp of approval almost that you get from saying, oh, I'm published by so-and-so, and people have actually heard of that publisher, and they give you a professional looking cover. Plus all the marketing that they do for you. And my publisher did a lot for me. My publisher did a ton for me that I literally could not have done on my own. They got me into some of the most competitive YA book festivals in the country. I wouldn't have been able to even apply to those had I been self-published. My publisher got me into Comic-Con. I was on a book panel at Comic-Con. Again, would not have been possible were it not for my publisher and their relationships. Being traditionally published offers just a level of vetting to me as an author. And all the marketing that I do, I have done a lot of marketing, but nowhere near the amount of marketing I would do if I were self-published. If I were self-published, I'd probably have to do 3 times as much work as I'm doing now, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of work now. It really has been a joint effort between my publisher and me. Now, I think there's a lot of value in the marketing that I've done. There's a lot that I've done that my publisher could have never done, and there's a lot that I've done that does mirror a chunk of what self-publishers do. But this is why I respect people who self-publish, because I do think they're doing at least 2 times as much work as I am, 3 times as much work as I am. And I just can't personally, I know I wouldn't be able to manage that on top of my day job. But no, I don't have regrets because it's everything working in concert. It's all the things that I've done and the effort I've made, and I am proud of what I've done with this channel and other things and the relationships I developed. A few of the conferences I went to happened because of my relationships, so joint effort. And of course, I went to book events and conferences because I'm comfortable doing that. I brought that to the table. That was me. But then my publisher got me in and they paid for everything. Very important. My publisher paid for all of my travel. I'm very fortunate. And that is $10,000 to $15,000 I didn't have to spend on myself. And that's pretty significant if you ask me. Now, of course, now I have a very nice base, and so it opens up doors for me to self-publish in the future because I kind of already have that base platform that I was able to build in such a way by traditionally publishing. So I don't have regrets. Look for that nice post-mortem video. I go into kind of sort of my expectations, some of the disappointments of being a published author, and kind of going forward. So that's a good one to watch. So that's my short answer to that. I regret nothing. But I'm happy with how things went, disappointments and all. And I'm proud of the work I did, and I'm happy with my publisher. They were a very good partner. Someone commented that they loved how Stella's dresses always had pockets. Yes, relatable. Same thing in my new book. So many pockets, because pockets are so valuable as a woman. You need somewhere to put your stuff. So I'm pro dresses with pockets. All right, let's try to answer a bunch of questions really fast. Do you read other works and get inspired? Yes, I do. I am inspired both by good books and bad books. There's a certain magic in reading a book that disappoints me that really kind of spurs me to do my own writing. So absolutely I read to get inspired. Any tips on finding beta readers and critique partners? I have a whole video on that. I'm gonna link to it down below, but generally get into the writing community. That means kind of contest communities, pitch communities, there could be forums, websites, and don't be afraid to reach out to people who are writing things that sound interesting to you and maybe you have similar taste and you can exchange chapters. Does being an author change the way that I review books? Yes, I've spoken about this on the channel as well, but generally my policy is if someone is in my genre, they are in my peer group, I do not critically review their book publicly, meaning I'm not going to shit on another author's work publicly because we have to maintain a professional relationship, a friendly relationship. It's just I don't gain anything by kind of being that critical voice on the internet, especially because I am an author as well. I am a peer. I kind of leave that space to the readers because reviews are for readers. But yeah, when you become a published author, you do have to change kind of how you publicly speak about other people's books because you could need a favor from them down the road. You could have friends in common. They can, you know, have power over whether you get invited places. There's a lot of social politics involved. What are some ways a person can be a great support system for a significant other who is a writer? Give them time and space to write. If that significant other has these aspirations, say, okay, on, you know, an hour a day or this chunk of time on Saturdays or Sundays, your writing time will be sacred. I will clear space in our life for you to pursue your writing. So if you have kids, it's I'm taking care of the kids. If it's just, you know, being partnered together, it's saying, you know, I will go watch my TV show and I will leave you alone for 2 hours. I won't bug you. Especially if you are a male significant other to a woman. Women generally bear a lot of emotional labor in relationships, so it's just taking on some of that emotional labor can free up so much time for that partner to write. Generally, if your partner in the relationship, regardless of gender or gender identification, bears a lot of emotional labor and responsibility in your household. Anytime you can take on household kind of responsibilities and chores and whatnot that frees up their time to write, to go off and have concentrated writing time, is going to be helpful to them. So just be emotionally supportive, help them create that time. Aside from publishing your book, what are you proudest of accomplishing this year? Honestly, it's the growth of this YouTube channel. It still floors me. Think about this. A year ago, I don't even think I had 700 subscribers, and I'm about to hit 15,000. That is bonkers. All of the growth happened this year. I hit 1,000 in about February, and now I'm here. I'm proud of myself for deciding to do this and actually doing it, actually sticking with it. Like, the fact that I've stuck with my filming schedule still blows my mind. I'm honestly just proud of myself because this is a huge commitment, and I know I get really excited by projects and then sometimes don't follow through with them, and I committed wholly to YouTube, which I of course couldn't have done if I didn't really enjoy it here, but I'm really proud of that. How did films influence my storytelling? They definitely have, because I wanted to be a film critic. I'm a huge film fan. The way to answer this in a short way, I think they inspired me because most of my favorite films are character driven and deeply emotional. They made me feel things. They took me on a journey with a character, and I think that really influenced why I want to write stories, and that influenced how I write stories. So that is probably the biggest thing with film for me. Will I be doing vlogs for when I go to specific writing events or events about my book? I'm so bad at vlogging, like so bad. Like, just doing vlogging about my writing where like I hold my phone and try to do anything is a miracle. I get really easily embarrassed and anxious in public places, especially like with phones. I don't take selfies generally, but especially not in public. I don't like people looking at me kind of like acting like a cool person. I don't know. So I don't know if I'll ever have the be able to get over that kind of embarrassment and anxiety to vlog at events, but never say never. It's something I know I should work on. I just don't know if that's ever gonna happen for me. Ooh, what do you hope to see come to The Sims 4 in a future pack? University. I really loved university life in Sims 3, and because I like to do generational and kind of relationship and like aging play, I think that if they did university, that could really add to the young adult stage and also with career-based play. So something with university for sure, 100%. Is it possible for someone to publish a book outside of their country? 100%. Yes, it is. I have friends who live in South Africa, the UK, who have publishing deals and are able to be published. It is sometimes harder. It is more complicated, but an agent isn't going to not represent you because you live in another country. A publisher might consider where you live in terms of buying a book because it kind of ties into brand and marketing, but it does not preclude you selling a book. How does having your book featured in a subscription box work? My publisher took care of everything. Another thing where I'm just really grateful for my traditional publisher. It's the marketing department's responsibility to pitch me for book boxes, and then when I was selected, they just let me know and they had me sign things, and my publisher really took care of everything. I love them. Ooh, do I plan on writing any more Jane Austen or Regency author-inspired books? Maybe. I'm honestly not sure. The fantasy that I'm working on is historically inspired, not exactly Regency, but kind of will have a similar-ish feel, because I'm always kind of inspired by the social politics and drawing room type stuff generally. I love those kinds of stories. I don't have specific plans. I'm probably not going to do a Jane Austen retelling, another one anytime soon, only because Persuasion just felt like the right one to do, but a lot of the other ones feel really kind of overdone, and I don't currently have a fresh spin on any of them, but should I get one, then yes, I would write another one. What's my zodiac sign? I'm a Sagittarius. My birthday is actually the 19th of December, so now. Well, this might go up after. Or on my birthday. This might go up on my birthday. Happy birthday. How many rejections did you receive when you were querying? The first time, my first book, 18. I didn't query that much. My second book, at least 23. And my third book, 25. Because I only queried 27 people. I never queried more than 30 people for any of my books. With the first one because I did get an agent. With the second one because I just felt that it wasn't working, and I didn't want to kind of go into like my second or third hand roster of potential agents. I wanted to write a book that would land me the agent I wanted, and then on the third one I was able to hit that 27 query number, and then I got a great agent from that. So that's what it was for me. There were so many more questions, but I just can't get to all of them. But as I said, I will do some standalone videos based on a few of these questions because a few of them were such good topics that they deserve their own video. And you know, I'll do another Q&A in the new year, I promise. I think I got enough of these questions that this can just be one really long ass video. So I hope you enjoyed this Q&A session. If you have further questions, as always, you can drop any questions down below in the comments. I will try to answer them if I have the time. I think I'm usually pretty good about getting to people's questions in the comments of videos. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'll make more Q&As in the future, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Happy holidays, happy new year, and happy writing.